Welcome to Inside the Corner Office, a podcast where you will be taken behind the scenes of the daily life of a CEO. I'm Thomas Buberl, CEO of AXA. In each episode of this podcast, we will delve into a specific aspect of this role. You will see that making decisions from an office is definitely not what this job is all about. For every topic, we'll be joined by a leader of a major organization. I hope you will enjoy these discussions. Tune in and take a seat at the table. We are inside the corner office. Welcome back to the next episode of Inside the Corner Office. Today, I'm very grateful to be with Larry Fink, founder and CEO of BlackRock, the biggest asset manager in the world. From a startup with 8 people in a single room to where we are today, BlackRock with 11.6 trillion of assets in under management, operating in more than 30 countries and serving clients from more than 100 countries. He's particularly known for his annual letter advocating for long-term thinking. One of the most influential figures in global finance, he has shaped policy and corporate governance conversation at the highest level. Larry, thank you very much for being with me today.
Thomas, it's great to be here.
The first question I always ask, do you remember when we first met?
I think we first met when you became the CEO of AXA. I don't think I met you prior on your former job. And I think, if I remember correctly, you came to my office, but I may be wrong. What am I missing?
No, it was exactly. I went on my introductory meetings to, get to know our shareholders, of which BlackRock was one of them.
Yes, but you were very close to Philip and a few other people at BlackRock.
Exactly.
I remember that.
Exactly. So how did it all start with BlackRock? When you founded the company, what was the reason? How did you take the risk of doing this?
Well, it goes back to the beginning when I started in Wall Street in 1976. I had an amazing beginning of my career. In my first job out of graduate school, I realized within the first few weeks that I found my destination. I found the firm where I could flourish, but also I realized I had an ability to trade markets. Obviously, you don't know that until you are putting into a seat, but in a very short period of time, it came very natural to me to understand markets using some of my skills to invest and trade. And I had a very rapid career at First Boston. I became the youngest managing director at 27 years old. I was on the executive committee of First Boston at 31, and I became not the best of persons at 34. It was the failure of risk when I was 34 years old that led to, I would say, my disruption of my career. But importantly, it took me a year and a half to think about what would be next. So I knew I was going to leave First Boston, but it took me a year and a half to think about what was next for me. And I would tell you very clearly, the ashes of my failure became the fertilizer of my success.
That's a beautiful saying.
It was the failure of risk management at First Boston. And unfortunately, the history of First Boston and Credit Suisse was a repeat and a repeat and a repeat of risk management, the failure of understanding risk. But even back when I was there in 1986, it was that failure. But I knew I was going to do something different, and I knew that if I could start an investment management firm based on risk analytics, that we could make a difference. So I was able to hand select 7 other partners. 2 of them came from more technology background, which was very unusual.
How did you find them? Because finding 7 people is not easy.
I had a pretty large following at First Boston and at other firms. And actually, the weekend after I announced I was leaving, I had an open house at my house. And probably over 50, 60 of people who worked for me came over. And from that grouping of people and then subsequent other follow-up calls and meetings, I was able to handpick alongside with Rob Capito, who's still our president, and Ralph Schlosstein, the other partners. And the beauty of this, Thomas, was all 8 of us liked each other. All 8 of us did every job together. And importantly, now 37 years later, there's only 2 of us left, and one of the founding partners is on the board of BlackRock. But all 8 of us remain great friends. So people ultimately moved on. Most of them were here at least 20 years before they moved on, another 25 years. Each and every one of them had a great career even beyond BlackRock. But we are still friends. And that to me is one of the most proud points that, we were all there doing the job passionately together as a team. We remain friends today, and they're all very successful in their own right.
How did you make this happen? Because it's very rare. I mean, you start together and then you fall out, and often you are only alone. How did you make this happen, that the 8 that started and 2 or 2.5 are left in the board? How did you remain friends?
I think culturally we all had similar views. I think what differentiated BlackRock versus so many other startups in financial services, I don't think to a person was anybody interested in money. I think every one of them was interested in building an organization, being proud of what we built, being client-centric from the very beginning. And we always thought that your wealth or your income is an outcome, not a priority. And I believe that was a cultural connection that we all had. We all enjoyed building. We were not threatened by each other. And the one thing I could say, all of us worked as a team. There was not a moment in time where we were not a team. So much of it has to do with the type of person who came on board, to a person they were all great in their own rights. The one thing I did learn early in my career, you want to hire people always smarter than you. The other 7 were much smarter than I was. And it worked, and it's still working. And the same culture of those 8, it's way beyond that. I mean, I wanted to rapidly move away from this founder 8 people. I wanted to build a firm that still feels like a partnership, even when we were public, the type of partnership with people and having the passion together. And I still believe the leadership today, the majority of them are non-founders. Some of them have been here 25 years now, but they all have the same characteristics of it's about a team, it is about building, and everybody is so wired and so focused to be a fiduciary on behalf of every client. And it's probably more relevant today with the whole question of geopolitics today, the whole question of where is the United States going. We need to show each and every client that we're there for you. We're local in every country. We have to remind everybody we're German in Germany, we're French in France, Japanese in Japan, we're American here in the United States. But the founding team and now the current management team all have that same similar philosophy.
You said earlier that at the time you took 1.5 years to find your destiny. What did you do during these 1.5 years, and how did you find the destiny?
I actually was given a bigger responsibility during that time at First Boston, but I never forgave the firm how they treated us when we lost money. We were the most profitable division for 3 years in the firm. And actually, every year when we made more money, what the firm did is give us more capital. Okay, use more balance sheet, use more balance sheet, use more balance sheet. We didn't have the appropriate risk management tools. I blame myself. I don't blame the firm on that. But I took that responsibility and said, we are going to build our own risk analytics. And I always told everybody, if you know your risk, that means you probably could take on more risk. In most instances, when you don't know your risk, in most cases, you underinvest. But when you have a real good fundamental understanding of the type of risk you're taking, many circumstances, it means you could take on more risk. So risk management, and I said this early in our beginnings, risk management is not risk avoidance. And most people thought about risk management as risk avoidance. And I think many regulators think about risk management as risk avoidance. We always understanding your risk as a measure to understand when you could add more risk or when you should remove risk. But having that type of transparency, that understanding that allows you to really operate. So when we started BlackRock with that theory, and we were quite successful in the early years, and we reinvested that money back into what became Aladdin. And we continue to do that today. I mean, and now the Aladdin platform now is driving over, $2 billion of revenues today. It is the industry leader.
As an industry leader, you are also an investor in many, many companies. And you see many companies flourishing, but also many companies failing. You've seen tons of CEOs failing or succeeding. So if you look at the CEOs you've seen succeeding, what were the 2-3 characters where you say, look, this is where they have succeeded?
It's so apparent what makes the difference between a good firm and a bad firm, and that's culture. But it's also the difference between a good firm and a great firm is also culture. Culture is the driving essence of any firm. It all comes down to, as in every company, we see this in government, it comes down to leadership. If you have the right leadership that's encouraging the proper culture, you have the right leadership that is willing to take on growth initiatives that are properly judged and properly monitored, I always say, especially is in industries that are heavily regulated like ours, we need to have a culture of identification of risk. That's a cultural thing. So if you have this strong cultural identity that we need to identify risk and then have a culture of mitigating that risk and then cauterizing it. So it's identification, it's mitigating, it's cauterizing, and then regrowing.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest difference between great companies and good companies. If you catch a good wave, the whole industry rises together. It's when things are less good or where there's problems and you can see the differentiating firm. And those are the firms that can identify those problems, fix them. And so a lot of it is just cultural, of having a cultural process in which we're constantly moving forward. I say here at BlackRock, if we are not staying in front of the needs of clients, our clients are going to find somebody else to do it for them. Running a growth company, it has to be a dynamic force. You're evolving and changing with society. You're evolving and changing to stay in front of your needs of your clients. And if you're not evolving fast enough, if you're evolving too slow with society, you're probably going to have problems as an organization. And if you're not evolving and building in front of your needs of your clients, they're going to find somebody else to fill those needs. And those are the driving essence between a good firm and a great firm. It's the culture of driving change. One other little notion about great firms, they don't pause. They constantly move and evolve. And when you spend time with some of the great CEOs, you just see the dynamism that what they're promoting and pushing the whole firm forward. And they're building leadership around that is driving this together. And it's really beautiful to see. And as I said, you can really identify in almost every circumstance these great companies are driven by great leaders. And it's not an accident. And to have great leadership, you need a great, especially for public companies, you need a great board. I mean, you see that in so many times. So many of the failures of corporations that were, they expanded into a new business line and they have nobody in the board to judge that new business line. And that becomes the company's downfall. I think a board has to be within the game with management. They have to be a part of it. They have to be understanding it. They have to feel the pressure that management plays. They have to understand it intimately so they can be better judges of how well management's doing. If a board is standing outside and are just observers, technically you think of a board as an observer. They're in the stands watching the management team play their game. Now, I actually think the board has to be part of the game. And they're observers, but if they don't intimately know the business and intimately know the strategy and how we're going to execute, that you need this transparent dynamism between the board and management. Yeah. And if you don't have a transparent, dynamic board, then it doesn't work.
Often, the big discussion, I fully agree with you, the big discussion between a board and the management is also a question, how do you manage succession? And if I go to what you just said earlier around good firms have a good culture, are well-oiled, challenge themselves all the time, which would mean that you should try, if you have a good CEO, to do the succession as late as you can. What do you see? How do you find the right moment, angle to think about succession when it's necessary, not too early, not too late? Yeah, tell me about your learnings.
In BlackRock's case, the firm in the last 15 years has grown from a firm that was very little understood and to the global leader. And so the biggest issue that we've had over the last 15 years in terms of leadership, it's like catching a moving object. BlackRock is moving very fast as a moving object. And then on top of that, I need my new leaders to grow faster. As we are moving forward as an organization, they have to move even faster because they have to absorb more and more and more and understand the totality of the organization. That's a hard task. And that is, when you have a dynamic firm that's growing, it's harder to bring in a leader than a firm that is struggling. Let me just start there. We are a fast-moving object, and I'm trying to grow my leadership to allow them the ability to grow faster than the growth of the firm. And I think we are doing that, but I can't say it's an easy thing to do. It's a real challenge. And this is why myself and the board have been so systematic in reviewing our leadership teams. We are very systematic in reviewing their growth. We move them around to different parts of the firm and their careers that have more broadening of their horizons. having a leader who's really good in his or her vertical, that's an easy job. The hardest job in leadership is being inspirational across the horizontal. And to me, this is one of the key characteristics of developing the next generation of leaders to take over.
And that's very much also in the spirit you told me about your partners.
Right.
You started with 8, many moved on, but you're still good friends. And I think
and importantly, we probably have one of the greatest diasporas of any firm in terms of we have more CEOs and more companies. Now more of our former colleagues are in some form of government. And I'm proud of that.
You're famous for your annual letter to shareholders. That's probably the email that is opened the quickest, when it's still under embargo and you want to have a look what's in there. So what was the idea of it and what are you trying to achieve with this letter?
The first letter came out in 2012, if I remember. It was a reflection of that we're large shareholders of so many companies. Yeah. I was becoming frustrated that there's not enough commentary about long-termism. There's so much commentary about the ups and downs of the markets. Like I'm asked all the time, what do you think of the market? My answer to so many people, who cares? Okay, if your liability or if your objective is a 40-year retirement plan, it really doesn't matter. And so the first letters were about all these notions about long-termism. I think my 2014 letter was about, I would say, the negativity around the dependency on these proxy advisors. And then the letter started evolving. Then it became very clear to me around 2018 that, a corporation has many purposes. And I wrote about what is a purposeful corporation, that we have so many stakeholders. Our employees are stakeholders. Our clients are stakeholders. Our community are stakeholders. And our number one stakeholder still remains to be the primacy of our shareholders, the owners of the company. Yeah. But the owners are benefited if you have the most dynamic stakeholders in your employees and your clients, and you create growth that way. And so the letters evolved. My letters are actually a reflection of my conversations that I have with my clients.
That's good. Many people got very big and rich through imitations. So.
Right. So it was just listening to everybody and what's on their mind. Yeah. And the beauty is, because I do travel a lot and see many clients, I'm able to write about, I think, what are the essence of the global financial system. In 2020, more people were talking about climate and sustainability and decarbonization. So I wrote about that. Then we had the Ukraine war, and then we had and even in my 2020 letter, I said, if we don't create new technologies, decarbonization is really inflationary. Yeah. And so we had that inflationary moment, especially in Europe with energy prices. So 3 years ago, I started writing about energy pragmatism. But in the last 2 years, I've been writing heavily around the retirement crisis. Yeah. And the crisis is around government deficits. And the need for most of the democracies to rebuild their infrastructure, but they could build their infrastructure through retirement plans and all that. So it's been an evolution, but it's just a reflection on my conversation.
I think it's very good. On the other hand, you're going into territory that is sometimes seen as the political territory, and then you also have backlashes from politicians of different colors.
Really?
How do you make sure that you balance this and, not be too much of a cowboy?
So there was never a moment of thought that I was writing things politically. In every instance, I was writing what I heard from clients, and never did in my wildest imagination would it be weaponized. And in some cases, they have been weaponized. I'm still just as passionate about making sure that I'm writing about what's current, what are the issues today. But we are living in an era of populism, and it's very convenient to pick targets who to attack. Last year, we were rewarded $541 billion in net new business from our clients. So even with the attacks, our clients understood that we are fiduciary to each and every client. So I was always mindful that our clients still appreciated what I was writing.
But how did you deal with it on a personal level? I mean, it's quite tough. You want to do good for society. You want to contribute to the societal discussion. And yet you are being personally offended by people and you often don't understand why. How have you dealt with that personally?
There are moments where it's been personally hard, but I think that's the world we live in today. I've been asked a lot of questions about would I do anything over again. The answer is no. To me, you learn from even your mistakes.
We have to unfortunately already come to the end of our discussion. And as a last question, I want to ask you, you see many young people coming into BlackRock,
yes.
Many young people wanting to become leaders. What is your advice to these young people from the long and successful career you have had?
I don't think my advice has changed at all in the last 40 plus years I've been in this business. And that is, if you're going into this business to become wealthy, don't do it. If you're going into this business because you're passionate about the markets and you're passionate about finding opportunities to be intellectually challenged every day, this is a great industry where you can't stand still. I tell every incoming class, if you believe your learning period is over, please leave the room. Because if you're going to stay relevant to your clients, if you're going to be staying in front of the client's needs, you have to be a student every day. And if there's a day when you don't learn something is a day somebody else is. And so you have to be passionate about the ever-changing environment that we live in, the dynamism of it. And that's the beauty of the career in finance. It changes all the time. Think about the conversations we had in Davos just like weeks ago. And American exceptionalism, Europe is dead. And
it's slightly different today.
And today it's so different. And I find that fascinating. I get motivated by this change. I'm telling all my employees now is, okay, there's a lot of chaos. Run towards it. Don't run away from it, because we're going to find investment opportunities. You have to start with a basic view. Do you believe in the next 20 years humanity will be better than they are today? I still have that optimism. It's messy, okay? Humanity is messy. Markets are messy. Politics are messy. Yeah. But beyond all that mess, we find solutions. And my message to everybody who's joining this industry, jump into the mess, but also be somebody who can, take advantage of that you're quickly able to decipher where this is all going, but always have the North Star of long-termism. If your North Star is always about the long-termism, all this noise, all this stuff, it really doesn't matter.
Thank you, Larry, for a really great discussion with you.
Thanks,
and
Thomas.
I was certainly struck by what you said. Yesterday's ashes are tomorrow's fertilizers.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.